the line between trainwreck and magic is very, can potentially be blurry. And that's the fun of it.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. I've just spent a little over an hour and a half talking to the amazing Daniel Mintseris. Daniel is currently on tour with David Byrne with his hugely innovative Who is the Sky tour. I had the pleasure of checking it out a couple of weeks ago in Sydney, and it just blew my mind. I'd also checked out David's previous work on American Utopia. If you're unaware of what these tours are like, but are aware of David Byrne and his huge history as both a solo musician and part of Talking Heads, you do need to go and see these shows. And they're still coming sort of throughout Europe and US through to halfway through the year. They are 100% mobile, 100% live, and 100% wireless. They're just incredible, amazing choreography, and the whole thing is just mind-blowing, as I said. So Daniel talks a lot about that amazing show. We talk about his work with the incredible St. Vincent. We talk about his work with Marianne Faithfull, Meshell Ndegeocello, Joe Jackson. There's so much to cover off, and we cover it all. So I hope you enjoyed a great deal, and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. Daniel, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. How are you going? I think you've got some much valued time off before you jet off again.
Hey, David. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I have about a week. We got back from Perth, actually, a few days back. I'm actually even already kind of switched to my Eastern time, amazingly, and feeling decent. And yeah, we're heading off to Europe a little less than a week.
Yes, incredible. So I thought we'd start with your past 12 months and particularly the last few months. You're currently obviously touring with David Byrne on the Who is the Sky tour, but just tell us about what the last year's been like for you.
The last year, I guess early last year, things were reasonably quiet. I was just doing sessions at home and enjoying family time after doing a bunch of touring the previous year. And then, a funny sequence of events. And then suddenly I was all in on the new David Byrne tour cycle.
So, I mean, we might as well segue into that, the funny series of events. What led you to joining the tour? I mean, we're going to talk much more in depth about it, but yeah, what were those funny series of events?
Well, so David and I have known each other for a long time, actually, and we did tour together back in, I think it was 2012, 2013, for the Love This Giant tour, which was a collaboration project between St. Vincent and David Byrne. And that was great fun. That was my first taste of touring with David Byrne, which really is unlike touring with anyone else in the best way possible. And then lots of other things happened in between. And then the funny series of events was that I completely randomly, through non-musician friends, two different independent connections that happened by accident and happened in the space of a week or so. Met Ray Swen, and we really hit it off. And Ray Swen is the guitar player and fiddle player on this tour and also MD. And he had just been asked to join the tour as MD and was also asked for a keyboard player recommendation, and my name was one of the names. And David said, "Oh, wait, he's available?" And that's happened.
Great. And I think it's a legitimate question. Are you available? Because you're an incredibly busy person, as we'll explore through the interview. So, but we will go back. We'll do our traditional question of asking about your initial musical upbringing. So just tell us about your childhood, sort of moving to the US, and just what got you into music in the first place.
I grew up in Vilnius, Lithuania. That's an Eastern European little capital right in the center of Europe on the Baltic Sea. I just went to a children's music school when I was 7, just because my parents thought it was a good idea, just to have a well-rounded education. Nobody ever dreamed or feared that I would be a musician for life. And I studied piano as a kid, just sort of regular old piano lessons a few times a week. Piano and theory and all the other things that kids do when they study music. Very traditional. I did that for about 7 years and really didn't think I would stick with it. It was honestly a little bit of a chore. In the meantime, I picked up an acoustic guitar and was writing songs. I was 14 and all of those things. But a very kind and wonderful teacher at a local conservatory kind of talked me out of giving up on the piano, the keyboards, and introduced me to jazz and improvisation and the blues and electronic keyboards even a little bit, and just kind of said, don't throw all that away and hear all the other wonderful things you can do with music and use the skills you have and expand on that. So once he showed me what was inside the music and how the music was put together a little bit more than reading notes off the page as a kid, then I was kind of into it. So I went to the conservatory in Vilnius, and then I transferred. My family moved to Philadelphia when I was 19, and I transferred to Temple University in Philadelphia and finished the jazz arranging and composition program there. And then eventually moved up to New York. Yeah.
And so the Temple University education and the move to New York, and also back in Lithuania, I mean, that's obviously a great educational background. What were the key sort of takeaways from your education that you're still pretty much using today, aside from the obvious as far as being able to read and so, but there were some things that have stood you in good stead over the years?
Yeah, the education has been funny. It's something my friends and I have talked about so much. Part of it is, yes, great skills. You can learn music faster. You can read. You have a certain mastery of the instrument, a certain amount of dexterity. You have a certain amount of ear training and experience listening to classical music and experience with treating time a certain way that is very particular to classical music, which is, as it turns out, a good thing to have as part of your background. On the other hand, music education can also be a hindrance. And so part of the journey is to, I don't want to say unlearn things, because I don't know that I personally have not been able to necessarily unlearn them, but to find a way to not let it get in the way. So use the stuff that's super useful and saves time, but also just use your ear and use your intuition and use your taste.
Yeah.
And work on developing taste and just listen and listen and listen and listen and listen. So yeah, that's been the journey when it comes to education, trying to learn how to unlearn.
Yes. And is it fair to say one of those aspects, Daniel, as far as a hindrance is it that sometimes education, you lose your ability to feel the music and respond to it versus know how to play it?
Possibly. I feel like this is also very genre dependent. So once I got to New York, I found myself playing a lot of music that was very simple on the surface in terms of what your fingers are doing on the keyboard. It was, there was not much to it, right? But there was so much depth to it and there was so much you needed to know and feel and understand, whether you could put it into words or not. The intuitive aspect of all of that, the sort of by osmosis aspect of it that came from listening and using your ear and just kind of telepathy with the people in the room. That aspect of it I found really attractive, and it's also something that they don't teach you in music school. So, yeah.
Point.
That's where I found myself.
Yeah, no, excellent point. So those early years in New York, obviously huge city, huge music scene. What were sort of your initial experiences as far as playing live, any recording? What sort of felt that you got established on your feet as a musician?
It took a while. I sort of was very open, and I tried to meet people. I knew a couple of people from Temple University, from Philadelphia, who had moved up before me and made good inroads into the scene. So it's not like I had it cut out for me. It's not like I had a gig waiting for me, but I could meet people through those couple of friends that I had. And also to kind of cut my teeth and learn what matters and what I want to do, and kind of find my way, figure out that maybe I shouldn't just play piano. Maybe there are other things I could do that are super fun and might be kind of useful on the scene. I try to navigate it that way.
So you diversified a little bit.
Yeah, it took a little while. I was playing with a lot of singer-songwriters. I was doing some recording, and I started to expand the sound palette quite a bit and learn about sounds and how they can be achieved and what my sensibilities are in that world.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to delve into that in a little while as well. So I'm interested, Dan, what was your first sort of major gig, or it doesn't have to be major, but an ongoing gig where you go, okay, I'm on track here to make a living with this, at least as a start-off level. What was your first?
Well, I was making a living the whole way through, even from the very beginning. It wasn't always necessarily the dream. I was doing my share of club dates and weddings and various other things that I don't mean to put down at all, because there's so many super talented people doing that, and also people at every stage of their career still doing that because they find it fun or they find it a good exercise of various skills they don't want to lose, and all kinds of stuff like that. But I did sort of feel like I should keep my eye on the prize and kind of aim for playing more original music. I don't mean necessarily my own original music, because I've always really enjoyed working with other people and collaborating and kind of finding what I can contribute within their vision. But still, it would be music. It would be something new. It would be something that somebody's working on and trying to move things ahead, find something new for themselves, and I could find something new in it for myself. So that's where I kept moving, and eventually I met a wonderful lady named Joy Askew. She's an English keyboard player and songwriter and singer. Incredible talent, a huge pedigree in New York City. Every super talented player has worked with her, and I don't mean to. I'm very lucky that I found myself into her orbit. And funny enough, so I met her ages ago now, and we worked on a project of hers, and it was really fun, and I was learning a lot. And then other things happened as a result of that, various connections. I think she put me in touch with Fernando Saunders, who is a bass player who worked with Lou Reed for many, many years, and also I believe Jeff Lorber. And he was also touring with Marianne Faithfull and about to head off on another tour with her, and he was going to do a little tour of the Basque country of his own material for a couple of weeks before her tour started. So he invited me and a friend to join him on that tour, and sort of with the understanding that we'll see how it goes, and if all goes well, Marianne needs a keyboard player, so maybe you'll come on that, and that's what happened eventually, or actually pretty quickly after that. This is 2005. And Fernando would open for Marianne. It would be, I think, just me and him opening. Then Marianne and other people would join.
Yeah. And I do want to talk about that a little bit, Daniel. So I've seen some videos of that time, and the Marianne Faithfull performance is incredible. You're playing some beautiful electric piano pieces, but also, and this surprised me, I didn't know Marianne's back catalogue that well, but some really cool synth lines and solos and stuff like that. So just tell us a little bit about the preparation for that tour and how you set up for that.
Yeah, a lot of those recordings, maybe most of them, feature really amazing players, actually, and produced by some really amazing people. Actually, after I had been working with Marianne for a couple of years, I ended up kind of hanging out on a session that she was doing with Hal Wilner producing, with Mark Rebo and Greg Cohen and Jim White and some other people I'm not remembering in this particular moment, but it was kind of amazing, like live on the floor, beautiful recording emerging out of whole cloth in front of your eyes and ears. It was really unbelievable. So yeah, I think Steve Winwood was one person who did a lot of synth work on her recordings, and I'm sure there's lots of others that I'm not thinking of right now. But anyway, I was a young whippersnapper. I thought I'm just going to put all the work in and, use everything I learned and have every part down pat and every sound dialed in perfectly and, show up and ready to rock and roll. And my first education was that, people who had been working with her for 30 years were showing up and going like, oh, right, this one. I love this one. How does this go again? And what key is it in? So, and this is, at first I didn't know what to make of it, but then I came to really appreciate that kind of, let's say, more rock and roll approach than I was taught in jazz school. Although, on the other hand, the jazz experience, just like the ability to be in the moment and roll with whatever is happening, came in handy. So there's one, education is good for something. It's just about, your sum of experiences and how you choose to apply it in a particular moment. But yeah, that experience, I ended up touring with Marianne for a bunch of years, and I learned so much. I am forever indebted to her. May she rest in peace. And I met some amazing musicians, and I learned about how much more important the magic in the moment is than any amount of preparation. Of course, it depends on the music, but certainly for that music and for, I would say most music. The important thing is to really feel that flow of the moment and really listen and really be tuned in to whatever is going on right now. We're going to drop that beat. Great. I'm not going to miss it, or we're going to go here now. Great. Something unique and wonderful and magical, potentially magical, is happening right now. And the line between train wreck and magic is very, can potentially be blurry. And that's the fun of it,
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the videos do show that it does come out sounding magical. It sounds amazing. Do you recall broadly what the rig was you were using back then, Daniel? Because it did. It sounded amazing.
What's funny is that my rig hasn't changed. Essentially hasn't changed. Even from those early experiences, early on, I decided I was just going to go the software route. I went the software route before the software was really ready, let's be honest. I just thought it opened so many possibilities in such a neat, portable package, which for me as a New Yorker in a little apartment mattered. And just the fact that I could reach for anything and find ways to make it sound good and make it work for me, that was kind of the most important part of it for me. So yeah, there was a laptop, there were a couple of controllers. Could try to remember what they were if you want. I mean, on tour, it was the large controller would just be whatever the venue could provide.
Yeah.
I remember of my own, it was a Roland A90.
Very nice.
That served me well for a while. And actually, for a period before I got into computers, the Roland A90 actually had a very robust kind of internal split zone and just like performance architecture. You could do a lot. I learned how to get around that thing, and you could do a lot. It was pretty impressive. And I think there was a Roland controller of some kind, like a little one, maybe like a PCR 300 or something.
That's amazing. And as you say, Daniel, 2005, that was earliest days for laptop-based, soft synths and so on. So was that, I'm losing track of years, was Ableton a thing in 2005? I'm just struggling to recall.
My memory is not that great about that either.
Yeah.
I believe that it may have been.
Yeah.
I believe that Ableton was my host even then. I can't remember if I was using it for piano as well or not in terms of hosting, or if I was using internal sounds. I want to say it was probably software even then, even for that stuff. Yeah, mostly I didn't have any horrible computer-related experiences then. Things would come up here and there because of mostly, honestly, human error.
Yeah.
Or just not taking enough care with how I was using the system and what I was asking of it versus what it could offer. But yeah, it was a positive experience. I mean, positive enough that I'm still doing it today.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. Well put. And Daniel, so with Marianne, you said you played with her for a number of years. So the 2000 what was some of the key, both live performance and behind the scenes work you were doing? So I'm sort of thinking of leading up to the 2020s where I've got a whole bunch of stuff to ask you, but so the 2010s, what were the key projects you were involved with that stand out for you now?
So I met a guy named Peter Cincotti in Who knows what year that was? That may have been 2009 or so. And Peter is an insanely talented piano player and singer and songwriter in New York. He's just very much a New Yorker. Lovely, lovely, lovely guy, and so talented. And we ended up touring quite a lot. He was, a very different cup of tea than Marianne was. I believe he was a protege of Harry Connick Jr. And he loved Sinatra, and he loved that kind of old-fashioned playing and singing and writing, and really took that craft very, very seriously, both as a tremendously virtuosic piano player and as a singer and as a writer. But he was also working with David Foster and made a record with David Foster, and it kind of expanded and moved more into the pop territory, which he still sort of occupies. He found his niche eventually as a kind of jazz pop person. He keeps writing music and releasing records, and really, really happy that I got to work with him for maybe a couple, 3 years, if memory serves. I should have probably prepared the timeline so I could refer to it, because my years are
they blur.
All blurry, yeah. But it was such a great time. Such a great time.
And your role there, Daniel, obviously, if he's playing piano himself, it's sort of auxiliary sounds.
A lot of that was actually strings. Yeah. Again and again, I find myself playing string parts. I guess strings are not keyboards, but
it's the fate of many a keyboard player.
Yeah. I have conflicted feelings about that we can talk about if you like, but
yeah,
orchestra instruments, sort of the easiest access to those, certainly before playback became as ubiquitous as it is now, was through keyboard players. And, the simple reality was that people love recording strings in the studio because it sounds beautiful and gives the music so much depth and nuance, but then they can't afford to bring the orchestra with them, or even the quartet. And then you got to find a different way of doing it. Either kind of say goodbye to that sound and find a way around it, which I think is a very legitimate path, or you find someone like me who is going to do their darndest and hopefully make it sound good, and try not to feel bad for the string players that can't come on tour.
Yeah. And a spontaneous question, Daniel, right up to this day, what are your go-to string samples libraries? What to you is a relatively good, not compared to the real thing, good way to reproduce strings?
I will say it was always, as you can sense, a tiny bit of a sort of grudging foray. I prefer not to. It's not always up to me, and that's back then. I'll be honest, I don't remember. It may have been something from like the Reason library, because I was using Reason back then. After that, for a good while, it was Ableton's orchestral library. The orchestral pack that comes with the suite version of Ableton. It's not any kind of crazy, cinematic orchestral library like Spitfire or Elvis Corning Strings or any of those. And that's not what it's for. But what I found great about it was that it felt very playable. I think that's the main issue with using those beautiful, beautiful, fancy libraries, is that I don't think they're designed for live playing, even though they have all the key switches. And I don't know, there probably are people out there who are incredibly good at doing all that in real time and making it sound like an orchestra. I'm not one of those people. For me, I was always about the expression pedal, learned how to use the expression pedal with my left foot, and really became good at that. And I think that took me a good way toward toward making it sound decent, where I wasn't cringing myself, right? That's the goal, where I can actually enjoy making the music with it, whether or not it sounds perfectly like strings. The answer is probably not 100%, but that's okay as long as I feel like I'm making music and this is an instrument that I can sort of speak through.
Yeah.
So that's where the Ableton Orchestral Pack just felt playable with the expression pedal. But fast forwarding to right now, since we're talking about strings, there's quite a lot of orchestral sound that I'm reproducing on this tour right now with David Byrne. His last record, Who Is This Guy, was made with the Ghost Train Orchestra from Brooklyn. with really beautiful, intricate arrangements. We're not talking lovely whole note string pads. We're talking actual, very specific, very arranged, and really beautifully put together parts that really contribute to the song and make the song. So that was a real challenge. And Ray Swan, the MD, I went through a whole bunch of different libraries and ended up settling on not a sample library, but on a suite of physically modeled instruments by an Italian company called Audio Modeling.
Yes.
And it's called SWAM.
Yeah.
SWAM. Yeah. I hadn't been aware of it, again, because I never really made it a point to find the fanciest libraries, because I wasn't doing film scoring, and I thankfully wasn't really being asked to like pretend to be an orchestra in the studio or anything like that. So I was happy to use, actually, mellotron strings is something I really love, and I often mixed in the mellotron layer with the orchestral pack that I was using. And I was happy in that world, but it wasn't really going to fly for this, because a lot of the strings in particular on this were written and recorded for a smaller ensemble, more of a chamber string sound. So yeah, SWAM instruments ended up kind of a revelation on the strings, but also, and maybe especially on the horn side of things, which I know we're digressing, but that stuff is challenging to play for a variety of reasons. Again, because it wasn't designed to be played live, and also because every plugin is a mono instrument. So you have to kind of put an orchestra together and learn how to play it. But the result is pretty gratifying.
Yes.
It's fun to play, and I think it sounds decent. That's the very long-winded answer.
No, that was great.
And you read strings question.
And you read my mind down, because I was also going to ask if you felt grudging about strings, which I totally understand. Brass for me is the one that I really struggle with for that exact reason. So it sounds like it's a similar sort of approach.
Yeah. I think I always sort of suggest that perhaps we could do without the strings and the brass and find other ways of playing those parts, and the music will take on a slightly different color for that, of course, but maybe that's great. Maybe that can serve it well and make for a different sounding live version from what people are hearing on the record, and maybe that's valuable. And for some people, and in some circumstances, that can be great. Or maybe, in later touring cycles, maybe people are probably more willing to step away from the sound that they're enamored with because the record just came out and they're attached to it. Totally understandable. But sometimes you got to buckle down and make it sound like the record, or best you can, because that's the mission. And then you discover things.
That's right. No, well put. And so, I mean, you're playing a key role with a great piano player. What was the next step for you after that in New York?
After that, I met Annie Clark in 2011 through a mutual friend. So that was, I think I may have still been touring with Peter Cincotti at that moment, or maybe I had just gotten home or something like that. And Annie was reconfiguring her band and looking for someone who could be the sort of MIDI center of things on stage. And we had a really good time when we met, and we ended up working together for a good number of years.
Absolutely. And I'm really fascinated, obviously, about that stage, Daniel, because, I mean, you've already mentioned the joint tour with David Byrne that she did, but also just your role. Is it fair to say you ended up in an MD role with Annie's band? Yeah. So just tell us about your evolution within that environment, the learning curve for you, and just the pivotal role that you played.
Let's think. The evolution really was just in the sense that the band started off, it was a brand new band for Annie. It was a small unit. It was just Matt Johnson on drums and Toko Yasuda on bass and synth bass, and me on keys and Annie on guitar. And everybody was great at what they did. and everybody just got along so well musically, even though everybody came from different walks of life. Matt and I had known each other for some time at that point, but yeah, I think there was a meeting of the minds, and it very quickly grew into a really wonderful little family that was, here we are in the van trying to make it happen. It started, even though it was, Annie had been going at that point for a little while. I believe this was her third record. So she definitely had a following, but yeah, we were growing it. We were growing the following. In terms of musical evolution, I don't know, I just found myself in such an amazing spot where what the gig required of me was exactly what I wanted to give. So it just allowed me to find myself musically in more ways than ever. I think that's what we get out of every good working and musical experience. But in this case, it was just such a good fit, because Annie just wanted to go all the way at all times. And I was really there for it. And I think we all were. We worked really well together. Musically, she was happy to kind of let me go as far as I wanted to go and kind of apply more of my natural experimental sensibilities in more ways than had been appropriate before in other musical situations. But here, everything was kind of welcome and just a natural fit. So that was amazing. It was really, a lifetime highlight of a musical experience.
Incredible. And so, obviously, the St. Vincent albums, I'm thinking sort of Mass Seduction, Daddy's Home, there's incredible diversity and lots of synths and studio work in that. How did you go about sort of translating that into the live environment? It sounds like it was a fairly open field. Everyone was up for, expanding their horizons. What was sort of the discussion around making it work live that you recall? Or was it more fluid than that?
It was pretty organic. Nobody was saying, let's make it work this way. Sort of, my whole thing is I just sit down and try to spend as much time as I can in advance dialing everything in. And for that, and honestly, for everything from pretty early on, my first instinct and kind of the first thing I reach for is to try to get the stems from the recording. And I sample as much as I can directly out of the stems. If there isn't enough separation, I ask for more separation if available. If not available, then of course I reach for the sample libraries and the plugins and whatever is available to recreate. You know how it is. You can spend a few days on a single sound if time allows. This kind of thing usually is incredibly time consuming. The only way it won't be time consuming is you're just not given enough time to consume. So people, even though I've done this so many times now, I can't count the number of times I have dialed in a record now. I still couldn't tell you how long it's going to take, because basically it's going to take as long as you can spare.
Yeah.
Because this is basically endless, and then you get on the road and for a few months you're still tweaking, and if you're lucky enough to have the months to tweak. So always an evolution. But having said that, I tried to show up to the first rehearsal with everything dialed in. And it's amazing how much you can get away with by simply sampling the individual stems. It just becomes, it sounds effortlessly like what people want to hear from the recording, because people spent a lot of time finding that sonic language, and that's what they want to hear back. If you can mine it directly from it and turn it into a playable instrument where you're still performing it, but the sound is not an approximation, it's the sound.
The sound.
Then it's amazing how little you need. You just need like a couple of spots in the track where it's isolated enough, and then you can, loop it, stretch it, just do whatever it takes. And then it just sounds good when you play it. It just sounds good. It sounds like the part. It sounds like it has the intention. It has the emotional content that you're looking for. There's no need to reinvent it for this particular application. Again, another touring cycle down the road, maybe you want to reinvent it. Then you start from nothing and you reach for whatever other emotional content with other sounds. But yeah, it's really fun to play the record, as it were. Find it really fun. I find it very satisfying because I'm lucky enough to have really loved the recordings that I'm trying to reproduce with these folks. When I first heard Strange Mercy, which is the album that I joined Annie for the touring cycle in 2011, when I first heard it, it had been unreleased, sent to me with all kinds of disclaimers. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was so incredible sounding. It was so original. It was the way Annie and John Congleton, the producer, worked together, which I eventually found out that how incredibly hands-on Annie was and is about every one of those sounds and every bit of those arrangements. But also just, I later got to kind of observe Annie and John working together in the studio. And what an amazing pairing that was. It's really, really fantastic and beautiful. So yeah, that record just sounded like nothing I'd ever heard. Yeah, I wanted to play and sound like that. I was like, yeah, I can't do better than this.
I love it. No, very valid. And I mean, I'm really fascinated, Dan. As you know, the term musical director, MD, has such a wide gamut of definitions. So, an MD can be everyone from the person that makes sure everyone's on stage the right time every night and knows their parts, through to a whole spectrum across there. So what is it? What is the MD's role in something like St. Vincent?
Yeah, certainly from the beginning, I think it was more on the technical side than any kind of like, you play this side, which I was very happy. I mean, again, Annie is such an incredibly hands-on musician and knows exactly what she wants to hear, and she can explain it better than anyone, or just make you understand it better than anyone without explaining, which maybe is more useful sometimes. So my role was to implement the vision. So a lot of it was technical. One thing that we had to spend some time on was that a lot of the drum sounds from the recordings, we really wanted to have that aspect in the sound. And that's not something that Matt had worked with very much before. So he did an incredible job putting together like a brand new hybrid kit for himself that he, over the years, expanded and improved on in countless ways. It was really something to behold, both the process and the final result, and also especially what he was doing with it, which no one else could possibly do. But all those sounds resided on my computer, and I did all the programming for the drum sounds. And he and I had to work very, very closely together to figure out what sound can live where, whether it be a dedicated pad or mesh, or if it's a trigger on an acoustic drum that's layered with the sound of the acoustic drum, if it's a pedal, if it's a bar, if it's so many things. And then, for later recordings that were even more intricate, where sounds had to change from section to section of the song, I had all that automated. Eventually, we were playing to a click. In those days, we never ran very much playback audio. We did maybe like a few blips and bloops that there was no way for me to reach were there on some songs. But most songs, it really was just click. But we did need the sequence in order for all the sounds to change on time magically, because none of us had any limbs available to make those changes anymore. And, and certainly for Annie, I think that was a big part of her wanting to make a change at that point and bring me in. She had been doing, incredible footwork, trying to switch her amazing guitar tones from one sound to another while singing and performing for the people. And it was just becoming less fun than it was worth, I think, the actual switching stuff. So she would program all the sounds, but then I would be the one making the changes using MIDI.
And I did want to ask you a little bit about that, Daniel, because I had that planned as a question, but I'll work it in here as far as how do you manage redundancy with that level of complexity? So, I mean, did you have a backup laptop? I mean, most times we do now, but what was your initial way of managing redundancy and risk of failure?
Early on, we did not have redundancy. We couldn't afford it, honestly. And also it just felt like if the computer went down, there would still be music being played by humans. There was enough happening outside of the computer that we could get by until things got back on track, which I got good at getting them back on track if that's what was required. So yeah, my feelings about redundancy have always been a little complicated, even when things expanded and budgets grew and there was redundancy on top of redundancy and, multiple pairs of computers on stage and all of that. It's nice to have, and I'm not knocking it. It gives people peace of mind, which is very valuable. And if you manage it correctly, it's a good thing to have. That's certainly what we have with David right now. I think it's less important than people think.
Yeah.
I think, with the exception of, okay, if the gig is some number of percent playback, that number, is up to you. I don't know, 50, 80, whatever you want. At a certain point, if playback drops out and there's nothing left, then you're in trouble in front of a lot of people who are not going to be too happy. But barring that, again, what percent is acceptable is an open question, and I'm sure it varies. But I think that redundancy adds complexity, right? So yes, it's a complex system that you're using in the first place, right? You're asking a lot of this computer. There are various connections that can go wrong. That is also the case with hardware, first and foremost. In many cases, hardware can be more prone to malfunction than software and can certainly be less dependable or less consistent. You add a second computer, you have to add second of all kinds of other things. It just becomes a more complex system. There's more room for error there. If you have people looking after it who are dedicated professionals and it's their job to be side stage and be on the lookout for all that stuff, wonderful. But if it's just you, which was the case for me for a long time, managing two of it instead of one just kind of potentially was 6 of one, half dozen of the others, you know what I mean? Things like people tripping on a cable and popping it out of the socket. Okay, that can happen. Is that going to affect both computers? Maybe. Maybe not, depending which cable, right? I remember a gig, I don't know, it was some sort of Lollapalooza in Paraguay, or I'm sure that's not correct, but something like that, a big gig, 5 p.m. sound check on an open stage. We're really overheating. The computers are not playing ball. And guess what? Both computers are not playing ball.
Yeah.
It's your job to treat the system in a way that doesn't overtax it. That's right. Very, very important. So you have to really know your instrument and you have to use it properly and give yourself headroom and create as little room for error as possible in that regard, where your system is actually stable, right? But barring that, things can definitely go wrong. They can and will go wrong. And then, there's the question of, okay, the kind of thing that just went wrong, would it have gone wrong on both computers? Would it have brought both computers down? Possible. Very possible in many cases, like the one I just described. Are there circumstances where it's still very useful to have two computers and switch from one to the other, even if things haven't completely disintegrated? But let's say something is a little funky, that this is a little unusual. Let's switch to this other one just in case. Okay, that happens. Mm-hmm. I think that sometimes happens these days without my knowing that it's happening, because my wonderful tech is really paying attention and is making a decision in the moment that will be the safer decision, even though things are not falling apart. Yeah, it's lovely to have if there's someone to look after it and you can afford it and everything is perfectly taken care of. But it's not a be all and end all. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
No, that's incredibly valuable and really great insight. No, I appreciate that. So I thought we might move up to the current tour, but I'm going to put a bit of prefacing comments around this. So obviously you've mentioned the Love This Giant tour where Annie and Dave Byrne toured, and it feels like it was one of the seeds towards the way David Byrne approaches touring now, and that there was lots of amazing choreography in the way, lots of musicians on stage, just an incredible tour. Who is this guy? I'm fascinated. I've seen the show. I think most of our listeners and viewers will be aware of the show, but for those that aren't, it is 100% mobile, 100% wireless, and 100% live. So that is an incredible feat on its own. So I'm just obviously fascinated, Daniel, on you've already talked about how you got the gig and it makes sense. And just tell us about the learning curve to set up for the tour. And you've mentioned, raise the MD and so on. Just how it's a big, big thing to get ready for a tour like that.
Yeah, in this case especially, it was a big thing to get ready because there were so many elements involved that required sort of a very customized approach. I applied all my usual techniques in terms of sampling and sound design, but the orchestral aspect of things really required some searching. I really wanted to find something that would be fun to play and would make me feel like I'm making music and not just kind of hanging on. So it's funny how so much of this sort of thing, like decisions being made for your own satisfaction rather than someone out there in the audience or even people you're working with saying, oh, that's good or that's not good enough or whatever. It has to be good enough for your own self. That can be the bar that's hardest to clear sometimes. But so as I already explained, I found SWAM eventually. And then it was a matter of figuring out how to play it again, because it's a very kind of specific task in terms of how it handles polyphony. Well, because SWAM on its own doesn't handle polyphony at all. It just doesn't do polyphony, with tiny caveats, but just to be completely accurate, it doesn't handle polyphony the way a sample library would, where you can play chords and it'll play all the notes regardless of voices. With SWAM, you have to treat it like a real orchestra at all times. You have to account for every player. And your ensemble has to be consistent. Or if it's not, you have to find ways, right? Things like splitting the keyboard, things we're used to doing as a matter of course, where you split the keyboard and you play 5 different parts on the same layout or quickly switch or whatever. That kind of thing doesn't work quite as easily in this configuration. And the polyphony has to be handled by another plugin called Divisimate by a German company called Next MIDI. It's designed to make polyphony possible with monophonic instruments. It works with plugins like this, but it also works with monophonic synthesizers and really any monophonic MIDI sources. So it's just a very clever way of interpreting your MIDI input and translating it into polyphony. Has all kinds of tricks up its sleeve. Actually, it's quite an impressive piece of software. So yeah, it's this tandem of Divisimate and SWAM that makes the orchestral content possible. And as you saw, I just have 5 octaves of a very, very lightweight controller. It has to be lightweight because I'm wearing it on my person for 2 hours while constantly moving on stage. So that was the other aspect of preparation for this tour, is that every move is choreographed by a very talented choreographer, and we're moving amongst dancers who are really amazing, and we have to somehow fit in and not fall down, literally.
Yes.
And figuratively. So speaking for myself, I had never done anything like that. I was definitely game for anything, but I don't have any dance or movement training or background or aptitude, I'm going to say. But I was game, and certainly David Byrne is game every day and has always been, and that's the best inspiration you can possibly get.
Absolutely.
Handling all those parts in all their complexity, with the keyboard being on your body and your hands being on the keyboard in a way that they normally are not, just because of the ergonomics of playing a keyboard instrument change completely when the keyboard is strapped onto you, because you can't lean left or right, and it's also closer to you than you would like. Yeah, presents all kinds of crazy limitations. In addition to the polyphony issues with the orchestral instruments. So it was just like relearning how to play this thing that you've been playing since you were 7, It felt very foreign in sometimes frustrating ways. But if you spent enough time, then you can learn how to do that and also not mess up your steps.
Yes.
And also be at the right point on stage at the right time, and not bump into anyone.
That's right. And I definitely want to talk about how it works technically, Daniel, because that'll be most fascinating. But I imagine just the choreography and the level of complexity of the show being 100% mobile, I imagine there was a really significant rehearsal period in the lead up. This is not, I'll do 3 or 4 playthroughs of the set before we go on the road. I imagine it's significant.
It was the longest rehearsal period I had ever had, and it wasn't long enough.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I mean, within the bounds of what you're happy to disclose, I assume those first few shows, there were a few mistakes as far as movement and things like that.
Well, what's amazing is that David, from his experiences on Broadway and in theater in general, in the past years, I think he adapted a lot of maybe things from. I mean, look. Sorry, David has always had a very theatrical approach
Absolutely.
to making a show, as we all know, and is known for that and is revered for that. So this is just a natural evolution and a gradual evolution. As you noted, Love This Giant had the beginnings of that. And even before that, there was choreography in his shows. So on Love This Giant, I got to be the stationary one. Me and the drummer were stationary. Everyone else had to put up with this. To great effect. I mean, amazing. It's so worth it. But this time, no one is spared. And this isn't the first time it was done. On the American Utopia tour,
exactly,
is when this was all pioneered. Both the wireless MIDI and the total mobility of everyone.
Yes.
So we're just kind of taking it a few steps further.
And technically, I mean, I again watched the American Utopia tour, and I know there was a segment in that tour where David would say, we cop accusations all the time of this being sort of backing tracks and so on, and then did this amazing thing of getting each of the musicians to come in one by one and proving it was 100% live. Now, I'm assuming that hasn't changed, and I mean, but I'm also assuming you have to have a live triggered click track for everyone to work together, but that's not backing tracks, that's rhythm. But
we actually even only have click tracks on a few songs.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, okay.
And yeah, there's zero playback. There has been some discussion out there in the cybersphere about this. And I'll be honest, it's a sore spot because we put so much work and so much dedication specifically into not running any playback and actually running as little click as possible so that we can make the music for the people and for ourselves and to like really do it properly and do it for real. It takes so much work. And then you're like, are we too good? We sound too good. We sound too good. We can't convince people that we're actually doing it. Like it sounds so impossible. Clearly we overdid it.
Yeah, and I think it's a lack of understanding too, as you know. I mean, I think musicians get it as far as wireless MIDI, you know, the sounds are being generated away from the keyboard. I mean, I know you were packing a sort of an Arturia Keylab as you did. They're beautifully light keyboards, which you need when you're carrying them. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about that. Obviously, you've got your laptop, you've got this incredible stuff you need to have backstage to generate those sounds just for you alone. Is there anything particularly unique about how that's set up beyond the wireless MIDI?
There are some unique things happening. Fundamentally, it's the same setup. There are computers running backstage, but they're Mac Minis, not laptops. They are, you know, as powerful as you can get them because we needed that. Certainly for the SWAM instruments, you need every bit of CPU power you can possibly get your hands on. And that's been flawless. It's been great. But yes, it's a computer. I have a wireless MIDI system. Wireless MIDI, I don't know if that's come up on your podcast or not. I'd be curious to do like a global search of all your podcasts and see if anybody's talked about wireless MIDI. Before this tour, I always thought, okay, wireless MIDI, it comes up now and again. It just doesn't sound plausible.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you know, anyone I ever talked to was like, yeah, I don't think so. You know, you might get away with it now and again in a club or in some particular circumstance, but to take it on a big tour, on a big stage in front of a lot of people and hope for any kind of like reasonable latency, no way.
Yeah.
But then I get an email from the production manager and actually even from David himself. He's like, yeah, we used wireless MIDI and it worked. Yeah. So long story short, it is working. It took some doing.
Yeah.
to get it there. Ridiculously, the doing that it took was that we had to find more units of a wireless MIDI system that has been discontinued for a long time. Because apparently people figured this out at one point and it was working fine. And then not enough people were using it. So those companies stopped making them. Other companies came in their place. Those companies' products maybe are good and they probably work in a lot of circumstances, but our circumstances are pretty unique. We have enormous, I think, 28-foot screens surrounding the stage. We have a black track system that occupies the same network band as the wireless MIDI system. So we have, I can't tell you how many channels of RF, but it's something bizarre. So this is not a walk in the park by any means. So we had some trouble early on, minor enough for the audience perhaps, but pretty frustrating on our end. But eventually, for a few months now, we got our hands on this old system, and now we even have some spares, and it's been great.
Excellent.
It's been really great, and the latency is perfectly acceptable.
And I think you're right, though. I think it's a natural assumption it doesn't work. And I mean, aside from your wireless MIDI, this is pure guesswork. Some of the drum stuff is being triggered via MIDI as well. So you've got multiple wireless MIDI transmitters going on stage?
So the drum stuff actually is not MIDI because the latency is too high for the drummers. I've run into this before. Some drummers are willing to contend with the latency. Actually, probably a good number, but for many, it's just too annoying and too sad to have to put up with that kind of variation in timing. The feel becomes very hard to control, So we are using RF for drums, and it's the sensory percussion software that translates audio signal into, I couldn't begin to explain exactly how it works, but it makes the noises in the computer from RF signals rather than MIDI signals.
Yeah.
And that reduces the latency.
No, amazing. And one other thing, Daniel, I'm really fascinated, obviously because you're 100% mobile, some of the traditional, accessories like sustain pedals and volume pedals and stuff like that, how do you manage all that in a mobile environment?
Yeah, that was another big part of the prep period, is we had to figure that out. This isn't the kind of set of music that I would be willing to tackle if I didn't have access to that at all. So that was one of the first things I started sort of puzzling out and prototyping at home before even anything else. So ultimately, I settled on using my elbows in place of my feet. So underneath my costume, on my right elbow, there is a sort of large button that takes the place of a small sustain pedal that is wired directly to the keyboard. And I can press the button like this with my arm really against my body. That was a learning curve, no doubt. Although, as we pianists know, this is not an unnatural movement. For the people who are not watching this, I'm moving my arms up and down, moving my elbows up and down. This is a somewhat pianistic, sort of natural pianistic movement, except I'm using it in a very unnatural way in this instance. So yeah, sustain is on my right elbow and expression is on my left elbow. And that's a whole other thing. How to do expression. So I had some ideas about, modifying an expression pedal and maybe spring loading it and attaching it to a harness or my elbow or something like that. But I thought I would use my elbow to kind of, elbow up is higher CC numbers, elbow down, lower CC numbers kind of thing. But ultimately, when I met Arturo Leon, who is the amazing keyboard tech for this tour, I sort of described what I thought might work in terms of elbow movement and the little idea I had up until then about how to possibly approach it. And he just kind of went away for a couple of days and came back to me with a video of himself with a gyro sensor on his elbow that was connected to an Arduino little computer chip. I don't know if people know what Arduino are. They're little microchips that you can put code in. And so this chip, Arturo programmed it so that it took the information from the gyro controller, which is sort of like an accelerometer on an iPhone, which is one of the ideas I had. And yeah, that's converted into MIDI CC, and then that is wireless MIDI sent to the computer and is applied as expression and volume.
That would arguably be a world first, wouldn't it, Daniel? I'm trying to think of a more innovative use of wireless MIDI than that.
Yeah, there are products out there that do this via Bluetooth, and they're not designed to be worn on your elbow. They're designed to be. There are various very ingenious approaches. I had even checked this out years back. I checked out a product that was, it was a breath controller that also had a tilt capability based on a gyro sensor. Back then, I found it too counterintuitive to be usable. But in this case, it seemed like it might be the only way out. So it took some calibrating. It took some getting used to on my part for sure, and maybe still getting used to it. It's not a natural thing that you can immediately jump into, but it's making it possible. It's making it so that I can play with expression, actually make the music the way I feel it should sound. Translate body movement into sound the way we do when we play. So that's completely invaluable and pretty unique.
And you've sort of prompted me on a final question there is, stamina-wise, this would be one of the harder gigs. I imagine the fact that you're on your feet for the 2 hours, you're carrying the keyboard, albeit relatively light, you've got the harness. Is this one of the most physically challenging gigs you've ever done?
It's actually surprisingly okay. It's more mentally challenging than, it's not like I'm not doing any super fancy footwork. I just can't.
Yeah.
There's a limit to what's possible, and I feel like I'm pushing it pretty hard. But yeah, physically, it's probably a little bit more exercise than you get just sitting on a stool. But yeah, I don't find that I'm sort of falling down tired after a show necessarily. It might be hot. It might be. Yeah, it's an exercise, but with the excitement of it all, it feels okay.
I do want to reluctantly move on from David Byrne because, we've barely scratched the surface on a bunch of other areas of your career, but I'm aware of time. So I just want to briefly touch on, let's go next, Joe Jackson. So obviously, it couldn't get, I would argue, from one end of the spectrum to the other of the highly technical stuff you're doing with the current tour. Now, Joe Jackson and his 2 rounds of racket tour really required you to go back to what I would argue is a much more traditional piano playing role. Tell us a little bit about that tour and what you got out of that.
Yeah, it was a complete opposite in a hugely refreshing way. Joe had made this record that was based on a persona that he invented, a mythical performer from late 1800s, early 1900s in London, in the style of British music hall. And he wrote every song and wrote every arrangement, and every note was exactly how he wanted it. And lyrically, it was incredibly sophisticated, and he worked really hard on it. And it's full of amazing British slang of the time. It's really an amazing piece of work, and it's very much Joe Jackson. So it was amazing to all of us that many of the people in the audience who came enthusiastically to hear Joe Jackson, but didn't necessarily know very much about this new album. He never broke character. He always, in the promo, in the release materials, and in the promo and in the show itself, he always stuck to this idea that this is something that he's presenting, that he discovered manuscripts or sheet music somewhere, and he thought he would bring it to the people. It was amazing to us how many people were able to walk out of that show thinking that's exactly what it was, that it was just something that Joe dug up, silly old Joe. Glad we got to hear the hits, I thought that was a shame because of, again, how super Joe Jackson that material really is, and what an achievement. musically and lyrically it is. But as far as my involvement, it was a band lineup that would have been very traditional in those days. And Joe decided that he would bring 9 people with him, or I guess 10 including me. And it was, a couple of strings and a flute and clarinet and bass clarinet and trumpet and trombone and tuba, and his longtime drummer, Doug Yule, playing instruments of the time. We all had amazing period costumes on that Joe picked out single-handedly. And I got to do nothing but play piano and MD, I guess, conduct.
Yeah.
Because Joe really needed to be up front and focus on those lyrics and focus on the character and being with the people. And so I humbly took over Joe Jackson's piano duties and tried to conduct the great orchestra folks with my head.
And did an extremely good job. It's an amazing show from what I've seen on video. And how did you get that gig, Daniel? What made that come about?
Funny enough, a manager that used to work with David Byrne, whom I met on the Love This Giant tour, was and is now working with Joe Jackson. And he remembered me kindly from those days and reached out thinking that I might be a good candidate. And I met with Joe a couple of times. We had a couple of really nice hangs. He never heard me play, and he invited me to join.
And speaking of iconic artists, and I did mention before we recorded, we caught up with Steve Nieve around a week ago, and he was singing your praises as someone that's helped him greatly. Just tell us about your involvement with Steve and Elvis Costello, to what extent it was.
Yeah, I think I met Steve when I was working with St. Vincent. I think actually Annie and Steve collaborated on a song. I'm blanking what the song was. It could have been Black Rainbow or maybe another song. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. So that's how they had met. And then I think Steve came and saw a show, probably in Paris or maybe somewhere else. And then he reached out and we just kind of became friends. And he also revealed, to my astonishment, that he was getting into Ableton, and he said that he used this online video course that I had made to build his Ableton rig, or his file anyway. So at one point, Elvis Costello's band felt like, maybe Elvis felt like there needed to be a little bit of an adjustment or a fine-tuning or streamlining of things in the computer world on stage that had developed between Steve's system and drummer Pete Thomas's world. So Steve invited me to come out and take a look. And I ended up working with them for maybe a good 5 years.
Wow.
On and off whenever it was required. Most of the time it was just reconfiguring the system as required based on any new requests and desires, and maybe coming out for a few shows to make sure that everything's running smoothly, just behind the scenes. And then at one point, I even came out as a keyboard tech, which was a really amazing experience for me to have, because I always thought it was so fun to hang out with the techs and learn from them. And I always am so in awe of their skill set and work ethic. So I got to be around them for many hours a day for a couple of tour runs, and learned so much from them. They were so kind to me, even though I'm just a keyboard player who knows computers a little bit. But that was an amazing experience. I'm thankful.
Great.
I'm thankful to Steve for that.
No, absolutely. And the last person I want to mention, just again being aware of time, is Meshell Ndegeocello. So you've done some great work. You've co-written songs with Meshell. Just tell us a little bit about that relationship and another itch that scratched for you.
Yeah, I've been incredibly fortunate for the last few years to work with Meshell on a variety of projects. The co-write that you mentioned, that was just something she sent a demo, or like sort of an early version of a tune, and kind of encouraged me to take it beyond what she had and go further with it, which I happily did. And she incredibly generously gave me a writing credit for some of the ways of where I took the song. I'm so so humbled to be a part of that recording. Of course, it won a Grammy, and there's so many amazing talents contributing to it. I'm just really happy to be in Meshell's orbit. We have worked on a bunch of things now with her as producer. We made a Jonas Police Woman record together. We made another Meshell Ndegeocello record where we did Sun Ra material for that was really amazing. There were other projects. There's another one that I'm not sure that I can talk about yet, but it will come out soon.
Right.
Every experience I've had with Meshell, I also got to play a show with her, a live show, but most of it has been in the studio. She's an incredible human being.
Absolutely.
There's so much to learn from her as a musician and as a presence, as a sort of wise soul. It's been so inspiring. Every time I'm around her, I pinch myself and hope it's not the last.
Yes.
But it's always really, really fun, and she's super, super kind.
That's amazing.
And, she's kind of the amazing experiences I've gotten to have musically have all been, in terms of living life, the most amazing thing living life like this has been the people that I have met. The people that we run across in the course of this crazy business are just so extraordinary. That's always been the most gratifying aspect of this whole thing, the thing that makes it all worthwhile. I mean, yes, making the music, it's all about the music, yes. But just expanding from that a little bit, the personalities are incredible, not just for the whatever crazy stories, the touring stories or anything like that, but just how inspiring it is to be around people whose vision of the world is completely unique.
Yeah.
And just visionary, outstanding visionary take on the music and the world and the words and all of that. That, Meshell exemplifies that as well as any of the people that we mentioned on this.
Yeah, exactly. No, every single one of them deserve the title visionary. So I know I need to let you go, Daniel, but let's talk about, you mentioned before trainwrecks. Is there a particularly memorable train wreck that you can look back upon and laugh, or at least not cry?
Okay, I have a couple for you.
Yeah.
One will be relevant because it was a show in Australia with St. Vincent. It was in the early days. I couldn't tell you what year. I couldn't tell you what city. I'm sorry. But something happened. I think we lost power on stage. So everything shut down and used the whatever few minutes it took to restore power to first tell a joke that was incredibly off color and incredibly memorable that I cannot possibly repeat, but
okay.
It had to do with jam and jelly. And then she, I think maybe her guitar was still working, or one amp was still on, or I can't remember exactly. But she played a couple of songs just by herself, unplanned, unrehearsed.
Yeah, wow.
And the people were nuts.
Yeah.
People loved it. And just kind of what an amazing reminder that people come to a show not to hear flawless performance. I mean, they'll take it. They'll take a flawless performance, but they're there to witness something unique and amazing that will happen in front of their eyes, that will expose people's humanity and make them feel a part of it. So that was a very memorable moment, and thank God things go wrong. Can I say that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another one is, I mentioned the online video course. I've made 3 of them now. This is for a company that used to be called Lunda.com, but is now called LinkedIn Learning, which is part of Microsoft. The first one I made was in 2014, and it was while I was on tour with St. Vincent, and it kind of explains the St. Vincent on stage and software universe. Then there was another one in the middle about looping, but then I made another one a couple years ago now about troubleshooting. It's called Troubleshooting MIDI and Audio. So the idea is that it was for performing musicians or musicians in the studio and what to do when things go wrong, right? So My idea was to see if I can somehow summarize everything I've learned over the years about what to do when things go wrong and how to resolve them as quickly and painlessly as possible. So I worked really hard on it, and my idea was to base it on actual real experiences that I had had troubleshooting my own or other people's stage setups or studio setups. And it was, every little chapter was like a little whodunit, where first I show something going wrong, and then I gradually sort of take people on a little journey about how do we go about solving this and how we might have gone better about solving it. So the interesting part is that every possible thing that could go wrong in the making of this course went wrong. First of all, it took way too long for me to kind of write it and figure out how to go about conveying the ideas. And second, when I was actually recording it in studios in California, every technical and logistical thing that could possibly go wrong went wrong, and things went too long, and things weren't working, and I had to fix them, and things had to be redone. It took a day more than it should have. So my joke was that instead of making this course, we should have just shot a documentary of making this course, and that would be the course.
Thanks, Dan. That's definitely one of the more unique train wrecks. I love that. That's great.
But it came out pretty good, I think. I think it's, the product is still as intended and has some really great things about it that I'm very proud of, and very thankful to the producer for sticking with me for all of this. But yeah, it was kind of amazing. I was glad when it was over.
We'll definitely link to that for sure. And last question, Daniel, the Desert Island Disc question. So 5 albums, if you had to take them, what would they be?
I'll start with Facing You by Keith Jarrett. These are going to be records people know because... let's face it, it was just hugely influential for my piano playing and just kind of thinking about music. Björk's Homogenic has to be there just for the writing and the production, the sounds, the arrangements, everything about it is absolutely amazing. Pink Floyd's Animals, really awesome, and I just loved it as a kid. It was very formative. A more recent fascination of mine is tango music. Specifically very early, what's called golden era tango, or maybe even before that. So there was a record in 1928 by Julio De Caro called Todo Corazon. It's really, really beautiful, amazing tunes, and fantastic performance, and everything that I think tango is about. And finally, Messiaen's Turangalila Symphony. Which is an expansive, like an hour and 20-minute, 10 movement work. Yeah. For a chamber ensemble. It goes all kinds of crazy places and can keep you entertained and feeling things for a while. So that would have to be there.
Picks. Look, Daniel, you mentioned just a little while ago that audiences come to see something amazing and unique. And I think it's fair to say that pretty much everything you've been involved with fits that well and truly. I mean, you're an amazing musician, and it's a joy to watch you. I know I've had the pleasure of watching you now only the once, and I hope to again in the future, but I can't thank you enough for taking the time, and I know we've barely scratched the surface.
Very kind of you to say, David, and thank you again for having me. It was really, really great to talk to you.
And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed speaking with Daniel. I mean, such amazing insights on a whole range of areas. Just even the issue of expression pedals and sustain pedals with the David Byrne show, that alone is worth the price of admission, let alone all of Daniel's other insights. Just what a quality musician and understander of the genre. Absolute privilege to speak with him. So a huge thanks to Daniel for his time. A huge thanks to you as always for your time, and also special thanks to our gold and silver supporters. So the amazing Dewi Evans from the sunny land of Wales. Thank you, sir, as always. The musicplayer.com forums and keyboard corner. Thank you, team. The brilliant Tammy Catcher from Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you, Tammy, for your long-term and ongoing support. And last but not least, Mr. Mike Wilcox from Midnight Mastering. If you do want to get your own work produced in a quality way, Mike is the guy, so midnightmastering.com. Again, thank you for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. Until then, keep on playing.